Hello, everybody, and welcome to our third YouTube session of the Pixel Project's ninth fall edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. My name is Anusha Kandasivam. I'm your moderator for this session. Through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 11 award-winning and best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for the Pixel Project to keep our efforts to end violence against women alive and kicking. So I'll be telling you more about our Read for Pixels fundraiser a little later in the session. We have so many exclusive author goodies. But meanwhile, if you want to find out more about the Pixel Project, please go to our website, www.thepixelproject.net. So for today's session, we have an amazing YA fantasy author. It's Romina Garber. Hi, Romina.
Hi.
So I'm going to give Romina a little intro just in case you don't know, which I'm sure you do. So Romina is the New York Times and international best-selling author of the Wolves of No World and ZODIAC series. Romina was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and raised in Miami, Florida, and she landed her first writing gig as a teenager. In college, she wrote a weekly Sunday column for the Miami Herald. It was later picked up for national syndication. That was amazing. And she hasn't stopped writing since. And she is a graduate of Harvard College and a Virgo to the core. So, Romina has also generously donated some super exclusive goodie bundles to the stash of author goodies we have set up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. Now, I'll tell you what they are. Goodie number one is Lobizona, signed and personalized. So that's it. That's the one. It's amazing cover. It's so beautiful. So Romina is offering signed and personalized trade paperback editions of Lobizona, the first book in her acclaimed Wolves of No World series, to Read for Pixels donors in the US. This is for US donors only. So here's a quick peek into this magical and utterly immersive series starter. Manuela Azul is an undocumented immigrant who is on the run from her father's Argentine crime family. When her surrogate grandmother is attacked, lifelong lies are exposed, and her mother is arrested by ICE, Manu investigates the only clue she has about her past, a mysterious Z emblem, which leads her to a secret world connected to her dead father and his criminal past. A world straight out of Argentine folklore where the seventh consecutive daughter is born a bruja, and the seventh consecutive son is a lobizon, a werewolf. This is a world where her unusual eyes allow her to belong. Sounds so exciting. And it is exciting because I read it and I know. So there are only 2 copies of this book available straight out from Romina's personal stash. So go and donate to get some. And goodie number 2, this is a really amazing one, is the Romina Garber Critique Bundle. This is available for donors worldwide. So if you're a novice YA fantasy author looking for a professional critique of your work, Romina is offering a most excellent critique bundle for one Read for Pixels donor. This is one written critique of either your query letter or the first chapter of your work in progress, and one follow-up email of 3 to 5 post-critique questions you may have. So there's only one opportunity that's available. It's a very rare chance for anyone working on getting their first book published to get expert guidance from one of today's acclaimed YA fantasy authors. And Romina is happy to critique works in English or Spanish. So this is our first time we've had a bilingual offer on the book. So, go for it. So we've raised $1,635 towards our $5,000 goal so far. So please do give generously before the fundraiser ends in October 2022. All the funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help violence against women. And our chat box moderators are putting the links up in the chat box. So go to the Rally Up page and check it out. Now, Okay, so we're going to go to the reading, but before that, I want to tell all of you. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can participate. You can ask Romina questions. Sorry, just make sure you're logged on to your YouTube account so you can type the questions into the chat box. And Juliana, who's today's producer, will relay them to me. I'll read them out to Romina to answer. All right, so on to you, Romina. What are you reading for us?
Hi. Well, it's so great to be here. Thank you so much. So I will be reading from my short story in the anthology Reclaim the Stars, which is an anthology of Latinx authors, YA authors. And we all put in short stories like from the countries where we come from, or just, whatever, something Latinx inspired. And so I wrote a short story that's from the world of Lobizona. So, and this is a book that just came out this year. It's very cool. It's got an awesome cover as well. I wish I had it with me to show. So I'm going to just read the first, basically the first act. Saibet knows her classmates' applause is born of respect, not affection. But for a moment, she allows herself to imagine they're friends. Nada está decidido todavía, she insists, her metallic gaze bright as she enters the dining hall. Still, their clapping persists, none of them wanting to hear her protest that nothing is official yet, not when she's the obvious choice. The Academy designates 7 graduates each year as leyendas. 6 of them are lobisones, but the 7th spot goes to a bruja, and there's no better candidate than Saibet. She's the most powerful congeladora, water witch, to have graced the school's hall since her mother, who was the 7th leyenda of her class, as with her mother's mother and her mother before her. It's an honor Saibet was born to earn. She has no backup plan. This is the plan. As though reading her mind, Fabián says, "Sos demasiado inteligente como para dudarlo." You're too smart to even doubt it. Saibet's mouth spreads into her roguish smile, an almost feral grin that lurks beneath her surface and makes it impossible for her classmates to figure her out. Is she a role model or a rebel? Does she mean the things she says, or is she just being provocative? Sometimes she can't tell herself. What about you? She asked Fabián in Spanish. You get applauded when you walked into the dining hall too? He frowns like he doesn't understand the question. Leyenda status is expected of the most powerful werewolf, so it's not considered a victory. Don't you think it's strange that we only celebrate the girl? Saibet presses. You're going to fault us for being too chivalrous? I prefer the term patriarchal. The students around them begin to disband, chasing the sense of entrañas, chorizos, milanesas, empanadas. Yet a small group of spectators remains gathered around Saibet and Fabián, mostly werewolves and Aurelia. Why can't you just be a normal bruja? Asks Fabián, his tone sharper now that their audience has shrunk. Keep this up and no one will ever want you. Saibet's fingers curl until her nails dig into her skin, but she has no retort. Fabián's boys hiss like they can't believe he went there, and they cover their mouths to conceal their smirks. Aurelia doesn't bother hiding hers. She's been coming in second to Saibet for years, and by now she can barely bridle her resentment. Or maybe you're like this because you really believe in the coven, says Fabián, and the wolves all snigger even harder. The Coven is a made-up, bruja-led resistance group that will supposedly launch a revolution one day. It's a long-running joke among wolves, and a secret hope among some brujas. Unclenching her fist, Saibet extends a hand to Fabián. He looks at her in confusion. You're top of the lobisones. I'm top of the brujas, she says, sparing Aurelia a glance for the satisfaction of seeing her grin wilt. But by definition, her attention returns to Fabián, there can only be one number 1. So let's settle it. Who's more powerful? His frown deepens as the guys around them fall silent. You can't compare wolves and witches. We're different. We don't have the same abilities. Let's keep it simple then. Saibet takes a step closer, her outstretched hand now inches from Fabián. First one to overpower the other wins. None of his friends are smiling anymore. Even Aurelia seems concerned. I'm not fighting a girl. What century are you in? Fight me or admit defeat? Their enhanced hearing means that within seconds, all the werewolves in the dining hall have abandoned their food and formed a ring around them. Fabián flashes the crowd a grin like this is part of some grand performance. When Señora Serafina comes around, he says to Saibet in a lower register, make sure you tell her you asked for this. Saibet doesn't blink as she says, with this handshake, we both consent to whatever happens next. Fabián's fingers close around hers, and his nails curl into claws. He's smiling as his midnight eyes swirl with light. Fangs descend from his lips as facial hair sprouts and his body lengthens and curves, grows hairier. His transformation stalls. Fabián's grin droops into a grimace, the expression freezing on his face. Literally. There are gasps as Fabián's brown skin turns blue, his dark eyes lightening as they frost over. Saibet's metallic irises glimmer like moonlit oceans. She's numbing Fabián's power and keeping him from shifting. Her magic is wrestling his brawn, and at this moment, she's winning. That's enough. The students break away at once like a school of fish scattering before a shark, except for Saibet and Fabián, who are still holding hands. It looks like he's trying to speak, but even his vocal cords have iced over. Senora Serafina touches Fabian's arm, and instantly, the light of Saibet's eyes flickers off. She loses her balance and steadies herself against a table while the directora's moss green gaze brightens, and what looks like vines grow from her hand to Fabian's skin, healing him. She's a jardinera, earth witch. What happened here? The head of the school demands. She went hysterical, Fabian sputters, pointing his finger at Saibet. Just because we did something nice, we congratulated her, and she attacked me for it. The directora narrows her gaze at Saibet. She doesn't look surprised or amused. You know better than to use magic on another student. I'm sorry. Saibet directs her apology to Fabian. I promise to never emasculate you again. He glowers and spins toward the directora. You keep asking us to try being her friend. Now do you see why she's alone? Saibet's eyes flash to Senora Serafina, the air catching in her throat at her teacher's betrayal. Let's go, says the directora, and Saibet considers not following. But she's enough trouble as is, and she's not about to risk making it worse. I'm going to have to report this to your mother. And who do I report you to for going behind my back to my classmates? I don't need your charity. Did you ever think maybe I'm the one who doesn't want to be friends with them? Saibet, as a leyenda, many doors will open to you. I hope that when you walk through one, you won't do what you did here. Senora Serafina's thin hair falls over her face as she leans in, her tone more intimate. Don't shut everyone out. We're a pack species, so change won't work alone. I've proven myself harder than all the brujas here, and it's still not enough. No one cares, not even them. They're fine with their lot in life. Like being second to the Lobisones is the best we can expect. Doesn't anyone want more? Senora Serafina exhales, for the first time seeming tired to Saibet. Her green eyes soften into the borderline parental affection that's become a blurred line between mentor and mother. You're smart, and I've no doubt you'll shake up our world. I'm excited to see all you'll do. But if you keep talking this way, you're going to attract the wrong kind of attention. Directora is the only Septimus Saibet has encountered who believes the coven is real. She fears Saibet being led down a dark path. Yet at the notion of the coven existing and wanting to recruit her, Saibet feels what she didn't feel when her classmates celebrated her. Nostalgia for something she's never experienced. The kind of pull on her heart she only ever senses at the full moon. We don't know our own power, warns Senora Serafina. We must be careful. From the tone of her voice, Saibet senses her dismissal. You can leave your plate here, she says, as Saibet rises to go. Graduation is in 7 days. I need you to keep it together until then. Before shutting the door behind her, and without waiting for an answer, Saibet asks, I'm curious, Senora. If we're so powerful, why is it we don't have any power? That's excellent.
Thanks, Maria. That was exciting and also very thought-provoking, I think.
Thank you.
Could you remind us again what's the name of the anthology that's from?
Yes, Reclaim the Stars.
Reclaim the Stars. Okay, we'll keep an eye out for it. And so should you, everyone. All right, so I'm going to jump straight into my questions.
Yes.
We have something that's kind of related to the excerpt coming up. But I want to talk about your female characters. So we just saw Saibet, who's pretty amazing. And your books feature some really compelling female characters, as Manuela, of course, Roma, Kata, Saisa. They're all complex and well-rounded characters. They have agency. They're keenly aware of and responsive to the sexism and misogyny they encounter in the world around them. The clearest example of this can be seen in your Wolves of No World series, where your female characters rebel and they speak out against the patriarchal and heteronormative society that segregates magical abilities along gender lines and discriminates against women's magical abilities and even the everyday tasks they perform. So, who or what are your inspirations for your female characters?
I think the strong women in my life obviously are inspirations. And I think that in a lot of ways, I'm thinking about the world I want to craft, for like my niece, who's 4 and turning 5 this year. And I think a lot about these young girls. I think a lot about the stories I wish I would have had on the shelf, about the kind of women who would inspire me, and with ZODIAC in particular, my first series, I remember that I received so many messages from women saying that they were changing majors to politics after reading Rose's story, because there was some strong message they received from the book about how hard it is to be a woman in politics, particularly a young woman. in
Mm-hmm.
politics, and how our voice, really gets drowned out so quickly,
Mm-hmm.
and dismissed. And so, which was a big message of that first series. And so I feel like that, that is that's what I dream of doing, like inspiring people, to reach for more for themselves, to to get involved, to create, to build some of these, better worlds we can dream of,
Mm-hmm.
or ideas, and actually enact them. And that's partly why not just these powerful women, but in particular, I'm writing YA about these
Mm-hmm.
powerful women, because you could write genre fiction,
Yeah.
about strong women, and all of that. But the reason YA for me is so important is it's a category defined by the reader,
Mm-hmm.
by their age. That's really
Yeah.
the only thing that defines a YA. And what's so
Mm-hmm.
powerful about this particular reader is they're still forming, and they still haven't closed themselves off to the notion that the world can be different, that some of these ideas they read about can be manifested. And, case in point, these young ladies who wrote to me from ZODIAC saying they were going to run, so I just feel like it's so rewarding to create these characters for this particular audience, because it's not just someone to comfort them or a story to entertain them, but it's also something to help form who they're going to become, who to help inform who they want to become.
Yeah. So it kind of brings me to my next question. Why did you create this kind of society and culture in the series, the patriarchal kind of society, instead of a society that's more gender equitable, for example, that could be sort of an ideal of what we want the world to be?
I would love to have written that, in the same way that I would have loved for Manu to find this other world and discover that there she's accepted. But again,
Mm-hmm.
these things would have felt too easy, and I think it is the job of sci-fi and fantasy to reflect the world around us. We have to be these little sociologists, I think, and I couldn't really address, Latino culture, Argentine culture without addressing machismo culture,
Mm-hmm.
which is something like, that I just grew up very aware of. And it's something that's threaded in, and the fact that this particular myth about the werewolf has a version, that says that
Mm-hmm.
that the seventh, consecutive daughter is a bruja, kind of like presented such a perfect metaphor, such a perfect way to talk about this rigidity, this binary, and not just like, women can do this thing and men can do this thing, but also our bodies, like about our bodies having to decide who we are, what gender we are, what,
Mm-hmm.
whatever else. And how, like, to show kind of how when we're born into this system and we have to modify ourselves to fit into it,
Mm-hmm.
how silly that is, whereas we should be modifying the system to fit us, that just makes more sense to me. And so I kind of try to show that. And there's a similar message in ZODIAC as well, because in ZODIAC, you have this, in ZODIAC basically is a series where your zodiac sign is where you're born, not when,
Yeah.
so it's your planet. And you look a particular way from being born on that planet, just like here, like biologically,
Yep.
but some people begin to shift how they act and how they look, at certain points in their lives, and they're called risers. And they're people who don't actually belong to their house. They don't know where they belong somewhere else, and they begin to shift into a different house. And there's people who are very much discriminated against, so
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I'm constantly finding ways to talk about this idea we have of, categories and classifications
Yeah.
and the binary, and this notion that things are as they are, and it kind of gets to the heart of why I wrote this, which is about language, and ultimately how, we defined words, and now words have come to define us. And,
Yeah.
like this word illegal, and a big part of this was taking back this word, right here, undocumented.
Mm.
Undocumented is such a beautiful word. It actually means original, special, unique, never before documented. That's a great, empowering, wonderful word. We are all undocumented. We are all new, and I think, like, that's part of the writer's job, right? Is to take back the power sometimes, of certain words, and also to remind us that words are here as supportive role to us. We should not be supporting words and labels,
Yes.
So
Yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of undocumented, so Manuela, she's an undocumented immigrant. She faces so many obstacles in her life, right? In the way her that impact the way her journey unfolds. So she's undocumented in our world. She's considered illegal in the magical world. Her otherness is compounded by her unusual eyes. Why did you decide to create a female protagonist who faces all these challenges, in addition to all the sexism and misogyny in the world around her? It just seems so much.
I know it's funny you say this because it reminds me, I was at this writing conference once and I heard someone say, this author say, you will, I wonder if it was Libba Bray. I can't remember exactly who it was, but it was an author I really admire. And they were like, you will know which character an author loves the most because they will be the ones who are just have it the worst. Like they just like suffer more than it's like an author's love is such a curse. I don't know why that is, you know. I don't know why we do that, but for me, I wanted
Yeah.
to paint this picture of someone, of Manu, because a lot of times I feel like we encounter people from marginalized communities or who have different backgrounds than us
Mhm.
through books, through art, through shows,
Mhm.
through movies, you know? And so books, art, whatever, it's empathy generators. That's why we do this. And so a lot of kids might hear at home or at school or in politics locally talked about illegals or undocumented and all this stuff and not really know what that means or realize that it just means someone just like them, you know, who is just
Mhm.
human, who just has the same dreams, has the same things, and is just as trapped by their parents' choices, by government, by circumstances beyond their control, by where they
Mhm.
happen to be born. And I think this is such a great way to transmit that. And I think that if you do feel for Manu, you know, then hopefully you're gonna come at this with a different mindset. I remember when this first came out, I had a lot of readers in the US
Mm.
reach out to me and tell me they thought the first few chapters was dystopia. They thought it was a dystopian from the first few chapters. They didn't realize, no, no, this is real life for people who are
Other
undocumented.
people, yeah.
Like, you
Wow.
know, like they had never stopped to think about what that might be like. And I think that's so important, you know, like this is
Mhm.
why we write these stories. So yeah. So I think, you know, she had to have it hard because you know, this is sadly, she hasn't even had it as hard as some people. I mean, like when
Mhm.
I was writing this, there were babies being caged at the
Mhm.
border. You know, that was
Mhm.
the environment I was writing this in. So I was really, you know, and if you read the acknowledgments for Cazadora, you know, it really drives home why I wrote this duology. It was very, very important, very personal, you know,
Mm.
and very much a reaction and a response to what was happening on our own soil,
Yeah.
inspired by history that had happened on Argentine soil. You know, so I feel like it's very important. This is partly also why we have to tell our stories, tell marginalized culture stories, and empower, you know, authors to tell their own stories because this is how we learn about these other narratives and
Mhm.
about history and about things that have happened in other parts of the world, and we can begin to prepare for them, you know, because you know, ideas are not contained by borders, you
Yeah.
know, they're just not.
That's
So
true.
it's important that we know where this leads, this kind of behavior.
Yeah, yeah, you're totally right. Okay, so now all genres have their shares of female stereotypes and tropes. Your books do lean hard into some classic YA tropes. There's the chosen one, there's magical schools, there's love triangles, but your female characters are anything but stereotypical. How do you subvert stereotypes to create a female character with agency while dealing with the world around her, including situations that involve sexism, misogyny, and violence against women?
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. I love tropes and a big thing that like I'm a big proponent of until everybody's done it, you can't even call it a trope, you know? And because, you know, we've seen a bunch of times a certain type of person be the chosen one at a magic school. We haven't
Mhm,
seen a brown, undocumented girl born into the wrong body be the
mhm,
chosen one at a magic school, you know? And part of the reason why I like to do this, I like to you know, kind of like create, like present these tropes, but with a completely different perspective is I
mm,
want to highlight, like bring to the surface the difference, right? Like, so we can appreciate that for a white, cis, you know,
mhm,
heterosexual boy being the chosen one, being he who lived, you know,
mhm,
he has to be constantly heroic to reinforce that heroism. He has to be, he's at the forefront of everything. He's celebrated. Like, this is how we maintain that chosen one or heroism.
Mm.
For someone like Manu to be the chosen one hero, she has to be the opposite. She has to be invisible. She has to be
Mm.
not seen. She has to suppress her power. She is a threat. And so I think it's so important that we write these tropes through all these perspectives to show how it is not fair for everyone. You can
Mm.
have the same trope, but a different character have it experience it completely different.
Mhm.
Um, and that's our reality as well, you know? And so, like, we're so much more forgiving of men for things,
Okay.
you know, than of women, you know? And so, you know, it's that was a big part of it as well.
That's interesting. So, um, like you say, female characters who do not conform to cultural expectations are often perceived as unlikable, and doubly so if they are people of color or they're from marginalized groups such as immigrants. Do you ever feel pressured by gender and cultural stereotypes to make your female characters likable or relatable? And have you ever got any flack for not making your
Yes.
female character likable? Or
Yes,
yeah?
yes. My Zodiac series, Row,
Mm.
people hated her. Like, in the first few books, I remember the way they would talk about her in some Goodreads reviews would be like, "Oh my God, did she insult your mother? Like, did my character go off and do something horrible, like off the page when I wasn't looking?" Like, it's just horrendous. And all because she's flawed. Like,
Mm.
all because she makes mistakes.
Yeah, yeah. I
You know,
read
I
some of those reviews. Yeah.
Yes, and I remember being lauded by Kirkus reviews for having finally it's like different for having a flawed protagonist, you know?
Mm.
And then at the same time being just destroyed for it, you know, by readers who like expect perfection, you know?
Mm.
And it's like, you know, Harry makes a million mistakes in Harry Potter, nobody talks about that. You know, Percy makes a million mistakes. You know, it's like it's fine, you
Yeah.
know, it was fine, forgive. But it's like when it's a girl, you know, you have this expectation. And then
Yeah.
not only did she make mistakes, but also they would not forgive the love
Mm.
triangle. You know, it's like
Mhm.
how many male characters experience love triangles or questions, you know, whatever. And like, but with her case, it was like people, and what's funny is like, it was like, you know, they take whatever team they were on, they would pissed, you know, about her having this question. So I think, you know, yes, I've experienced that. And it is really frustrating that
Mm.
double standard.
Yeah. Speaking of Harry Potter, he wouldn't have survived if Hermione wasn't there and telling him what to do
At
all this time.
all. Oh my
Yeah.
God, he would have died in the first
Yeah.
book.
Yeah, he would have. You're totally
Yeah,
right. Yeah. He's kind of useless.
I know.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, all right. So we can go on about this, but let's move on. So, most of your books definitely pass the Bechdel test with the inclusion of really complex relationships between women. We have female friendships, we have mother daughter, grandma daughter, that kind of thing. We have mentors and yeah, and students. Why do you think many SFF authors still have trouble writing stories that pass the Bechdel test, despite the fact that there are so many more things that women talk about other than men?
Ugh, that's so hard. I don't know. I think, you know, part of it is also like what people think people want to read. You know, I feel like it took me so long to finally
Mm.
write stuff that was true to me and not what I thought was expected of me. You know, I mean,
Mm.
I even blame myself a bit in a different way because Lobisona has an ancestor
Mm.
called Yellow Eyes from like 2008. And it was like, you know, obviously, as you can tell, a very similar concept by the title, like a girl
Mhm.
with these eyes, you know, and like also immigrants, Argentine, all this stuff. And at the time I was trying to get published, you know, it was before I was published or even agented. And I went out with this and I just remember an agent telling me, you know, teens here they just don't want to read about Argentine immigrants. And it was
Oh.
just so painful because it's like, I am an Argentine, like you're saying my story doesn't matter, that my
Yeah.
identity doesn't matter. And it took me so long. I mean, it took me until 2017 to write again about my own heritage, my own kind of characters. So it's like it is really hard. You can get shut down, you know, and it becomes so hard to try again to push the envelope. You know, I'm not saying that's for everybody, you know, but I do know
Mhm.
that, you know, it can shut you down when you think that people don't want that. Like when people kind of send back and reinforce these messages of that kind of, you know, narrative.
Mhm.
and you think your story isn't welcome. But something that I really particularly enjoyed about writing Dobi Sona was writing these women who aren't all likable. You don't know exactly their story from the first few chapters.
Mm-hmm.
They take a long time to kind of unravel, but also the idea that feminism is not monolithic. Like there was a
Mm-hmm.
time when we kind of had to be monolithic because we didn't have a voice. So if we didn't all unite in unison to raise our voices together, it would have been a mess and no one would have been heard. But now like we're past that moment. Now we're
Mm-hmm.
at a point where we can all shout and we're no longer monolithic. And so we can have different ideas of what it means to be an independent woman, empowered, feminist, whatever it is, you know? And so
Mm-hmm.
there's a great conversation that I love in Lobisona between Saisa and Kata about this in particular, you know, where they talk about Manu and whether she needs to be this feminist symbol or not, and like what the meaning is of her existence, you know, and they both
Mm-hmm.
have very different points of views on it, but both are valid, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then it ends with like my favorite quote, which Saisa says, "Why settle for being a son of the system when you can mother a movement?" You know,
Mm-hmm.
which is really the bottom line of this, you know, duology, right? It all summed into one line.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Pretty cool. Okay, so do you have any suggestions for SFF authors who want to write female relationships and conversations realistically or even plausibly?
yes, I think it's important to not just get your research from like TVs and books, you know. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it's important to talk to people, you know, to really get involved in conversations, to, you know, if whatever, I mean, every book has a different subject, you know. So like whatever it is that your subject is about or that your characters are involved with or whatever the whole that world is, it's like exploring it beyond just the superficial. And I think a big part of that is, you know, when we're world building, we should be world building with a world view.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is we shouldn't just be creating worlds and these characters to populate them. We should really think about the power dynamics of these worlds when we're building them. Who has power and who doesn't? Who has it best in this world and who has it worst, and why? Like all of these things are so important. And I don't think we ask enough questions of our worlds. Like, so to speak a little bit about my process, you know, which we might as well get into a little bit in case that question comes up, but it ties into this. Like I very much like to begin with world always for this reason. I think it's so important. Like it's there's a line by Alan Watts. It's like, uh, we're not born into this world, we're born from it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so the world must exist before we can be born. And I feel very strongly that that is also the case for characters, that you have to know where they're being born into, what's the history of this planet, what kind of organic life forms are born on this planet. Like all of these things have to inform your character.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that the kind of, that's a big way to also, I guess, make sure you're constantly digging deeper, is by also remembering like that there's a bigger world beyond just the romance story or the
Mm-hmm.
main plot, you know, main plot line. There's like so many other things. It's like the reality, you know, like
Yeah.
our real, we're affected by multiple things, you know. So I think it's about broadening and really thinking about, why am I writing this story? Why am I bringing this character to life? Like what is this contributing? You know, where digging a little deeper.
Yeah, that's really good advice. You're totally right. I think people kind of forget that for the sake of the plot and like, you know, yeah, there's other things happening. There's, you can talk about like, I don't know, cryptocurrency or something. So yeah, you know, if or politics, you know. So
Exactly.
yeah. Okay, so we have an interesting question from one of our viewers. So this is a two-part question. I'll put both parts up. So
Yes.
Misty06, hi Misty. Misty asks, so you brought up how authors continue to receive pushback for wanting to write more about their heritage, identity, or culture. In a few acceptance speeches at awards, authors express their frustration with this constant annoyance, and yet it still happens. What can upcoming writers do to push their story for publication?
Um, you know, I this was in 2008. I will say like the landscape looks very different now. Like when I read like Publishers Marketplace deal announcements, for instance, for new books coming out in YA, like they are constantly lately really beginning to reach like broader and broader audiences, and talk about different. So I think I have hope basically, like, and I'm not like an optimist, by nature, but I do feel like we're starting to break down those barriers. But I think a big part of it is like, we need to start populating, we can't just be trying to start getting from the ground up. We're going to have to start pushing for more power within the infrastructure, of
Mm.
publishing, because like I remember when Nobisona, we're talking like 2018, it was acquired. And I was like, oh, who can edit my Spanish parts in it? Because there's a lot of Spanish. Like, I think
Mm-hmm.
like a fair chunk of the book is in Spanish. And there was no one who could edit it, And so I contacted the Spanish translator, to see if we could hire her to edit the Spanish portions in the English book. So it's like, we need to start, all of us, like every kind of identity, everyone needs to start being represented
Mm-hmm.
within the infrastructure of publishing as well, because that's how we, not just getting through the door, but keeping that door open,
Yeah.
so that more people can walk through is so important. But also insisting upon it, like when this book, like I was saying, when Yellow Eyes got, just crushed, I gave up for a while, like on telling this story. And so I would say, like, have faith, believe in your story. And, ultimately I went back, and obviously Lovisona would not exist if I didn't,
Mm-hmm.
so nothing you write is ever lost. Sometimes it's just about waiting for the right moment.
Hmm. All right. Good. All right. So, all right, keep your questions coming, people. And meanwhile, I'm going to ask more questions. So, we've been talking a lot about female characters. Let's talk about male characters. So, there are misogynistic characters in your books, but generally, the male female relationships between the main characters are quite equitable. And some of your male characters are respectful of women, their thoughts, and their decisions. Do you think reframing how stories describe men away from hostile and toxic stereotypes and towards complexity and even vulnerability can be one of the ways SFF writers can break away from these tropes that promote toxic masculinity and the dehumanization of women?
Yes, yes, that was so well said. Yes, yes, absolutely. I think a big part of it is, who is the role model? If
Mm,
like, if James Bond is your role model and he's killing, people, and every time there's a new sexy lady at his side, it's like, that's what you think is cool. You know what I mean?
mhm,
Like, so it's really about what are we putting out there to inspire people. And I think it's so important that, yes, that the boys we write in these stories, and the men,
mhm,
and all these, like, that they represent a view of masculinity that's more in line with what we hope to see, with more a more equal world, and also ones that blur a little bit, like what that even means, breaking out a little bit of that binary,
mhm,
and kind of like, I love the group in Nobisona, and I really was like, oh, I'm gonna have to write a group that's mostly guys, because it's this team, the sports team, and I was a little worried about that, because I'm like, am I going to really like it, writing these guys? And I had such a great time, because I realized, like, I was seeing them as fully realized people and not stereotypes, and that's such an important thing, coming at it as like, without any preconceived notions, like, one of my
mhm,
favorite characters is Pablo, who's this
mm,
like conspiracy theorist
mhm,
werewolf, and he's hilarious, and he's so protective of his friends, but he's also very like fair,
mhm,
and so, and in Cazadora, there's another character who's in the group, but you see him more of him in the next book, who ultimately really kind of defends Manu at the end. And like, I just felt like these are important role models that I want to see more of, and in that case, I had based this one character, Diego, on my cousin, who was killed in a terrorist attack in Israel. And
okay.
so and I based it on him, and he was actually going into politics with a lot of like ideas of peace, and he was a very different type of guy, very different, like, just very nonviolent, very warm. Everyone loved him. And I was like, I want to try to infuse more of these kind of people, male role models into my
Mhm,
books. And so I put him in, so in this case, it was a particular person, but in general, yes, I think that's very important.
mm. Do you think then that eventually the violent alpha male type character is going to phase out of SFF as cultures worldwide start kicking out toxic masculinity, or do you think it's one of the stereotypes that's going to stick around for much longer than expected?
I don't think anything phases out. I mean, we're still
Mm-hmm.
reading Shakespeare. I think that everything goes cyclical. I think right now we're going through a phase that's like, where we're rejecting a lot of these things. But I think, like, as with anything, when you go too far, you always come back around, and we are not good at moderation,
That's true.
I have this line in ZODIAC. It's when we open our minds too wide, we risk closing them. And it's like you can be so open-minded, but you can also become so obsessed with a certain issue or certain
Mm-hmm.
idea you have of something, even being super open-minded, that you ultimately become closed-minded about
Mm-hmm.
it, and that happens a lot with, like, when we go too left, so even though I'm very liberal, I do try to remind myself of that moderation is the only way we're going to stay the course. And I worry about that sometimes also with, like, some of these marginalized stories. Like, if we go to too much of an extreme, people are going to react, and then it's going to become a trend, and then
Mm-hmm.
we're going to go back to not having it, which is not what we want. So I
Yep.
do think it's important that as we tell these stories and infuse these new notions of what being a man should be, and what kind of, what new stories, and broadening our horizons and all of that wonderful stuff, we should also not be forgetting, or disregarding people who still fit into the other kind of world, and trying to bring them along too. Otherwise, yes, I do fear that this will only become a phase, and that then people will go want back to that notion of the alpha male, whatever. And that scares me, that really
Mm-hmm.
scares me.
Yeah. I see what you mean. You're right. Yeah. Okay. I never thought about it that way actually, but yeah, I think you are right. Yeah.
I
Okay.
just think people, ping pong, like, they don't like, and
Yeah.
it's like, no, 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 let's move in this direction. This is
Yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so stories are one of the most powerful ways of bringing about social change. So let's talk about writing stories and genre. So the line between consent and coercion isn't always very clear in fantasy books, whether it's epic fantasy, urban, paranormal romance is a big culprit. Certainly in some subgenres of fantasy, such as grimdark, violence against women is still often used as a catalyst for a male character's development or as a shorthand for showing how brutal this world is. Do you think this is an issue that writers in YA fantasy have started tackling successfully in recent years?
I do. I really do. I think, that I do. I'm seeing so many more, like, stories, also just moving beyond that in
Mm.
general, just like into, like we were saying, like, there's so much more to write about,
Mhm.
and I do, like I see one question here about in books I've enjoyed recently, and this ties in nicely with that. Like, for instance, I just read, Our Crooked Hearts,
Mm.
and I loved it. And it's so wonderful because it's a story about a girl, and it also tells a story about her mom, and they both kind of engage a little bit with witchcraft. And but they basically suffer loss and kind of try to deal with it through witchcraft, and it tells their story, and it's so intimate and so wonderful, and just so, like I love that we're kind of getting away a little bit from the whole, like black versus white, good versus evil, like
Mhm.
all these reductive notions and concepts, and getting into murkier waters, of what does it mean to tell a fantasy story. Sometimes it's not this whole big, sometimes it's more intimate than that sometimes it's like the deeper you go, the more fantastical it feels, so to speak. And a sci-fi I read that I loved recently was Alone Out Here.
Mm.
um, and it's a sci-fi where basically, like, the world is going to implode, and so all the different leaders around the world are preparing for it, and everybody's kind of got like a model of an arc ship that we could go off into space, once
Mm.
our world explodes. And of course the American company gets the license,
Mhm.
the contract, and they're making the arcs, but the whole world is skeptical. So of course they all the, like, leaders send their children to tour this model of the arc to show that there's world cooperation. And while they're touring it, of course, calamity strikes, and suddenly all these children are like in space trying to create a new like it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of Lord of the Flies in space, but
Mm-hmm.
you've got all these, and it's so fascinating and it's so well done. It's got none of that stuff that we're talking about, it's just
Mm-hmm.
like, none of that. Like, in fact, the romance is the least interesting part because there's
Mm-hmm.
just so much amazing, like, and it's like, I think that's so important because like teen readers aren't just, bags of hormones, you know what I mean? Like, as much as people want to make us think they are. It's as a teen, it's also like your intellect is exploding. You're exploring new concepts. I remember like as a teen just being so fascinated by the concept of space, of
Mm-hmm.
something being like ever growing and ever expanding and eternal. Like it would like I would spend so long trying to it's be like, how can I conceive of that in my brain? How can I understand it and whatever? And so I just think all of these things are topics that interest teens, and this book did such a great job of pushing that question of like, what if we were out in space and in this kind of infinite, sense, and what would happen? And so I do think there's more to be explored. And I think books are doing a better job of doing that.
Okay. So, okay, in your opinion, how can authors strike a balance in their storytelling between raising awareness about violence against women or misogyny while telling an engaging story without being pedantic or preachy?
Oh my God, that's so funny. I said preachy because my editor's favorite thing to put on my book is like preachy, like stop preaching. I'm like Miss Preachy. I cannot help it's so horrible. So like I'm like the worst person to ask this. But I think we do need to remember that like at the end of the day, we have to enjoy the story. Like that's the
Mhm,
thing. It's like what makes a good story is something you really enjoy. And unfortunately, the messaging is always going to be secondary, So we
mhm,
have to remember that as creators that the most important thing is how is the execution, is how we get there, and the better and more exciting and more and well better done that the story is and the characters are crafted and all of that, the harder the message will hit, and you kind of have to
yeah.
trust. And the other funny thing is a lot of times as authors we're not even aware of half the stuff we're packing into our
Yeah.
books as far as messaging and meaning and whatever. And a lot of times readers will come to us and say, oh my God, this message about this and that. And I'm like, oh, right. This was exactly, I was commenting on this,
Uh-huh.
like just,
Yeah.
so that's also true. Like this is what's so beautiful about this. It's like, it's not just us writing it, but it's also like the reader contributes so
Mhm,
much to the reading experience and to the
mhm.
story. So yeah,
Yeah, I think you're right. Everybody's experience sort of informs their experience of reading the book. So people get the
exactly.
message they need out of it. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. Okay, so let's talk about geek culture because we're all geeks here. Geek culture in general, including science fiction, fantasy, has had its share of critiques saying that it's still too male dominated, despite there being a rising number of prominent, well respected, and well known female authors. Plus, there's still plenty of hostile, misogynist, and sexist behavior by male geeks towards female geeks. So, what do you think needs to be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether it's comics, gaming, books, cons, more welcoming for women and girls?
Oh, that's such a good question. I feel very unqualified
Oh,
to
oh dear.
answer that, but it's funny. I was just at Phoenix Fan Fusion,
Mm,
and I had so much fun. And it's funny what you say. Like you're right. I definitely felt like a more male dominated world. And like all
mhm,
but as a woman there, like I definitely didn't. I wasn't made to feel any type of way. And
mhm,
I mean, I do feel like maybe a few years ago, a lot of these panels would have been mostly men,
mhm,
because I feel like a few years ago I did this trivia panel at Comic Con, and I was on a team with Patrick Rothfuss and Pierce Brown, and I
mhm,
remember it being like all like guys, like a lot of guys,
mhm,
and so you're right. I do think for a while there it did feel, but again, maybe I'm being too optimistic, but I am starting to feel a shift, I don't really know what, it's hard to say what would change. I mean, because a lot of this is the role models we're putting out there. And as long as
yeah.
like, I mean, look at Game of Thrones, I'm sorry,
Mhm,
but like that's like a lot
mhm,
of these things are being reinforced, and that's huge, and so it's sort of like it's, and then you even look at like costumes for like, characters
mhm,
for some of your favorite superheroes, and like you can't avoid seeing that a lot of the women's costumes are sexualized, and it's like there's a lot of, it kind of all gets, it's too hard to strip it apart because it's all one tangled mess,
Yeah.
and it's been crafted for so long that, like, I think the best way we can dismantle it is through this infusion of characters that are different, that
Mhm.
represent different values. And the more they resonate with people, the
Mhm.
more they will start to take over, than
Yeah.
these outdated ones.
Yeah. Do you think it is improving, right? The situation, it is it is not what it was a few years ago, but
Yeah.
there's still a long way to go.
Yes, there's still a long way to go, but having been at some of this, I mean, I feel like I started the conference stuff like in 2014 or something, so it's not like I've been doing it
Mhm.
forever, but have noticed a difference. I
Yeah.
do feel like I'm seeing a lot more women.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. All right. So, uh, we've been talking for almost an hour. We've come to my last cluster of questions. So it's a bit of a Captain Obvious question, but we ask all the authors we have on these questions. So you've been so very incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against women work as a whole. Why do you support the cause to end violence against women? And what do you think that authors can do to help with the cultural change needed to eradicate violence against women?
Violence against women is like it's one of the things that makes my blood boil the most. And in Argentina, there's a lot of issues with femicide,
Mhm. Mhm.
and so I don't know. I mean, as far as what we can do to get more involved is more things like these, and writing more stories that are representative, and reflective of what really goes on. Giving voice to these women, a big part of this. One of the big things that drove me the most to write this was, I remember hearing about women in some of these detention centers being forcibly sterilized by male
Mhm.
doctors. And that was something that, I mean, it's really hard to fathom, and so it's like a lot of these things, I think we need to shed light, shedding light on what's happening, and not letting men get away with this stuff, and writing these stories, and also not being ashamed. I get very frustrated when people write trigger warnings for Lovisona that includes menstruation, because
What?
that just, yeah, yeah. And
What?
it's very frustrating because it's like, I can't believe my body is a trigger warning for you, you know? It just completely reinforces the shame, and so, like, a big part of it, that's why the first line of Novi Zona, the first chapter, is about her period, because I think also normalizing and talking more about our bodies as they are and all this stuff, like, that's also going to help us a lot, so that girls don't have to be ashamed when they pass a tampon or pad in class, and stuff like that. So yeah, so frustrating. I know.
Missy feels the same way. She say what? Like I
Yeah,
didn't realize that having a period is a
a trigger.
horrifying thing. Yeah, such so horrifying. You need a trigger warning for it. My goodness.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. So that brings us to the end of our questions. Thank you so much, Romina, for answering all our questions. Thank you, everybody, for asking such amazing questions. Okay, so I'm going to put myself back on screen again. Hi, everyone. All right, so before we completely wrap up, I'm going to tell everybody again about the amazing goodies that Romina has donated to us that you can get if you go to our Rally Up fundraising page. So goodie number one is Lobizona, the book, signed and personalized, and this is for US donors only. Romina is offering 2 copies of signed and personalized trade paperback editions of Lobizona. And yes, that's the one. She has it there. This is the first book in her acclaimed Wolves of No World series. We've been talking about it this in the past hour and her characters. And so she has 2 copies of this book available, and they're straight from her personal stash. And then goodie number 2 is the Romina Garber Critique Bundle for donors worldwide. So this is for any novice fantasy author out there, YA fantasy author looking for professional critique of your work. Romina is offering one written critique of either your query letter or the first chapter of your work in progress, and one follow-up email of 3 to 5 post-critique questions that you may have. And Romina is happy to critique works in English or Spanish. And there's only one of this opportunity available. It's a very rare chance for anyone getting their first book wanting to get their first book published for some expert advice and guidance from a published and acclaimed fantasy author. Right, so these are up on our Really Up fundraising page, and there's only one of this critique available. And there's also plenty more other author goodies available. We have stuff from Alistair Reynolds, Julie Ishaneda, Kwame Mbalia, Namina Forna, Sue and Jafarian, Sujata Messi. We have bundles from Tor Books UK, Random House Children's Books, and so many more. As of now, we've raised $1,635 towards a $5,000 goal. We're doing pretty well, but the fundraiser ends in October 2022, so please do give generously. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. So I'm going to put up a little slide to show you where to go. So if you want to go donate to get these goodies, go to our Rally Up fundraising page. It's tinyurl.com/r4p Rally Up 2022. And yeah, so our chat box moderators are putting the links up in the chat box, so you just go click on that. And meanwhile, if you want to find out more about the other Read for Pixels authors we have coming up, we have a pretty amazing selection of authors this time. Go to our Read for Pixels page on our website, and yeah, the link is up on the chat box. And I want to tell everybody about our amazing charity anthology, Giving the Devil His Due. So it's an anthology of horror revenge stories. It's pretty cool. It's kind of like the Twilight Zone meets Promising Young Woman. It is now available. We have teamed up with 12 of the 16 authors featured in the anthology to offer an exclusive limited edition anthology booklet for early bird buyers. So each author will sign 16 bookplates, and it will be on a first-come, first-served basis. Each bookplate includes a resource for domestic violence and sexual assault victims and survivors in 205 countries. So for more information about the anthology, how to score a bookplate, go to our website and click on the Giving the Devil His Due tab. The link is up in the chat box as well. And if you're interested in getting your own copy of the anthology, you can order it from major booksellers worldwide. It's on Amazon, Kobo, Google Play, Book Depository, and more. All net proceeds go towards keeping our campaigns, programs, and initiatives such as this one alive and kicking. Right, and if you want to find out more about violence against women, what you can do to help end it, go to our website, thepixelproject.net. We have lots of resources from many different countries there. Go check it out. All right. Oh yeah, so I think Romina has an announcement that she wants to make before we wrap up.
Oh, yes, I have a new book just announced called Castle of the Cursed. And it is a gothic paranormal set in Spain. And so I'm very excited to share that that is coming out in winter 2023-2024. So have a little over a year to wait on that. But yes, I'm very excited to share it with you. I will have more about that on my social media. And I definitely recommend, if you're interested, following me on Instagram at Romina Garber, because that's probably where I'm the most active.
All right. Okay. All right. So thank you very much, Romina. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
And thanks, everyone. And we'll say good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you are in the world, and goodbye.